Welcome to Le Mafutanga. We are joined here today by Dr. Tim Gillespie. He's the lead pastor for the Crosswalk Church in Redlands and also one of my professors at La Sierra University. We're here to talk about, the church and COVID-19, 2021, what the church will look like, and just thank you for accepting the invitation today, Dr. Gillespie.
Oh man, thanks for having me. I'm really appreciative. It's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, 2020 is gone, but the effects are still lingering today. With the vaccine, the vaccine is out, and even the uncertainty of that. We're in 2021, and we're hoping for changes. We're hoping for something, hopefully move us into the right direction or a positive direction in terms of how we're going to worship. So what is that going to look like? How is 2021 going to look like now? Now that we look in the past of 2020, what can we look forward to in 2021?
Right. That's a great question. And I think everyone's struggling with that. Every pastor, every faith community is struggling to find out what this is supposed to look like. We have this little mantra that we say at Crosswalk, which is prepare, don't plan. And so we're trying to look at 2 or 3 different avenues of which we either come back to church or, do church outside or continue online. And maybe all 3 of those things will be happening kind of all at once. But I think what we've recognized is that it is really important for us to stay connected with the people around us, right? Church has served this function of worship for so long, and that's been kind of the main focus of a lot of the work that we do. The 2020 has taught us that, it's not just about the gathering, it's about the community and how we continue to connect with that community, even if we can't convene. So hopefully if we learn that, our convening, when we bring people back together, will be that much stronger because we've worked hard on all the ways that we connect outside of the gathering, if you will. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think the convening might look a little different too. Recently the surge in COVID cases and even deaths has impacted not only, just within the United States with over 300,000 deaths, but also the church. We are experiencing some COVID-related cases and deaths as well within Calamasa. And I know within the Adventist church, that's also true. So how's that going to change? Because connecting, yeah, that's fine. But then when a family is personally affected by this, that's going to affect their kind of, their approach to, well, should I go to church even if it opens up? What's going to happen even with the vaccines that are surfacing?
Yeah, I think that, so for us at Crosswalk, we have always tried to take a very cautious path. And I think that's really important. I think there's 2 ways that we get back together. And I'm speaking as, I spent some time working as a public health professional with Loma Linda University Health. And so I can tell you, from kind of a professional point of view, there's ways that we get past this and move past this. One is wearing masks and social distancing, or at least physical distancing, I think we like to say. So being careful with that, not spreading the disease anymore. And the second part is getting the vaccine that has gone through the proper trials and that sort of thing. And I know there's a lot of very strange ideas about what the vaccine does and, 5G and all this very strange kind of conspiracy theory things. I think that we need to be very careful with those as Christians because our guide is Scripture. And if you're wondering whether or not it's safe, don't go to the internet to find out, and don't go to a healthcare professional who can walk you through that, because the majority of the healthcare professionals that I know have read the documentation about the vaccine, and that will help us get back together. But we're not going to move faster than is safe. And I don't think any church should, because caring for one another is also making sure that we don't get sick. Especially, in the US and among particular people groups, things like obesity and diabetes, these are things that exacerbate the situation. And while you may get it and not die, someone who gets it from you may. And I, as a pastor, don't ever want to have to answer that question of why did you meet when you had vulnerable people in your community. So I think we need to be careful with that. And that will probably mean it takes us longer to get back to church as usual.
Yeah, and we had our staff meeting just the other day, and we, you guys have you're saying is prepare, not plan. And so we're I guess preparing or planning maybe something in a hybrid sense, or say for instance, we're talking about a program or an event in Easter. What's that going to look like? Because in the past, of course, Easter has been big for many churches. And so what are we going to do? Are we going to have an outdoor service by then? Are we going to be able to do some kind of physical contact, or is this just going to be another drive-through? And so how do we prepare for something like that? That's going to be the kind of the question lingering right now is how do we plan for 3 months, 4 or 5, 6 months ahead?
Right. Well, I think you can't in some respects, but what you do is you over prepare, right? You have 3 or 4 different pivot points. We can do it like this. We can do it like that. We can do it like this. You're always at this point. I think the concept of virtual church is going to be with us forever. Some of us were doing it before, like we live streamed it before, but I think it's everyone. It's mandatory now. Everyone's going to have to do it because there are going to be people who just don't feel comfortable coming back to church, and to varying degrees of. This is not going to be the last pandemic that we have. I mean, hopefully it's the last one we have for quite a while, but we're going to be in these situations again. So we have to create parallel lines that people can access the content, access the community. And there's all, we've been doing it now. We kind of were forced into it last March. Nobody thought we'd be doing it, come January this year. This is just, I remember thinking, well, this will be done by Easter, right? If it goes to Easter, that's a really long time. And now we're in January looking at next Easter, wondering what we're going to do. But I think you have to have you just have to think big. We can do this, or we can pivot to this, or we can pivot to this. If it's safe, we'll do this. And have those broader conversations across the board and just be prepared and really flexible.
Yeah. And I think, the churches like yourself, your church, our church, and, others have kind of adapted to, this online, worship. But other churches haven't. And that might, for various reasons. It could be, economic reasons, and this thing is costly if you think about it, but right. It's necessary, right? I know you're a big proponent of online, having the equipment and being able to do this so that we can reach that certain community that's going to probably remain at home watching from their TVs or from their computers.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to invest in it. And the beauty of the technology right now is if you have a relatively recent iPhone or Android phone, the cameras are of a quality that are quite honestly are shockingly good. And all you need to do is think a little bit about lighting, even if it's just like your home lighting, or buy, a $20 ring light. And you can begin to create a user experience that's pretty decent. And you can begin to create content directly for those people that are at home. I think we make a mistake when we pretend like everyone's still in the room and don't treat it as if this is different. And so I do think everyone has to do it, no matter how small your church is, because it's a new form of shut-in ministry, right? In some respects, people who can't get there, we want to make sure that they have access to the community, they have access to communion, they have access to all that. Well, we can do that digitally now, actually much easier than we could. And I think we do need to continue to use our deacons and our elders in ways that bring them out into the community as it's safe and as they feel comfortable to continue to connect physically with people, if you will.
Yeah, and let me know if this is appropriate for us, but I heard, might be rumors, that the Loma Linda staff, the University Health Center, the medical center, refused the vaccine. I don't know if that's true, but how if it is, how will this affect the rest of our community that looks to Loma Linda University Medical Center, this group of people, as kind of the standard of, if they don't do it, the rest of the church here, maybe in Southern California, they might not do it as well.
Right. So this is what I think about that, because what we're finding is about 40 to 50% of healthcare workers that are not willing to take it, which is shocking to me. If you want to know the truth, I find that shocking. So some of that is politically driven, unfortunately. We've so politicized the pandemic and masks and that sort of thing that it's kind of politically driven, which is unfortunate. Much of it is conspiracy theory, and highly educated people are not immune to conspiracy theories. And interestingly, Christians who are willing to suspend disbelief to believe in a God, right? We have this portion of faith where we say, well, it may not be reasonable, but we're going to believe in it anyway. If we are not careful, we are susceptible to conspiracy theories in ways that some other people might not be. And unfortunately, you marry that with politics and kind of the conservative politics of the day, unfortunately. And it's kind of a perfect recipe for people to say, well, I'm just not sure. And healthcare workers are also very concerned about what they put in their bodies if it hasn't gone through the rigors of testing. And so this coming so quickly, I can understand while some of them have concerns, but those that I trust that have read all the documentation, epidemiologists and for real people who do this full time, not just, and by the way, a podiatrist is very different than a neurologist who's very different than an epidemiologist, right? I know a neurologist who, when he works at our clinic, he's like, I just hope nobody goes down because I'm not good at giving CPR. And I was like, how are you not good at giving CPR? You're a doctor. And he's like, that's not the kind of doctor I am. Mm-hmm. So everybody has specialties. Not every physician knows the same. Not every nurse knows the same. So lean into the people where the real information can come really thoughtfully and have conversations and have broad conversations until you feel comfortable doing it. And some people might not, but I do think it's a problem when, it's a hot mess, right? It's a big mix of politics and conspiracy and fear, just fear in the public, and also this idea that the pandemic, and this is the one that I don't understand from healthcare workers at this point, the idea that the pandemic is just like the flu. Well, I've been through lots of flu seasons and never have I seen what's happening in our ERs, in our ICUs right now. I mean, literally, if you're in LA County and you're dying, you don't get to go to the hospital. They're going to do CPR out on the field, and then they're going to call your death in the field. They're not going to take you to an ER. I've never seen that before. So this is definitely different.
Yeah. I mean, how much of this has to do with religious beliefs within the Loma Linda community? I mean, because we're looking, this is the Mecca, right? Loma Linda is the Mecca of kind of Adventism here in the West Coast. And they can quite influence how we're going to approach this whole thing, the vaccine. So how does religious beliefs factor into this whole, I'm not going to do it or I am?
Right. So I would say the official stance of Loma Linda, and I haven't read it, but I know that they're giving the vaccine. So I would assume that the official stance of Loma Linda is that the vaccine is safe and you should get it. And we recommend that all of our healthcare professionals get it. Right. So I think, when it says, I don't think there's anything in the Seventh-day Adventist religious faith that precludes us from being able to get the vaccine. Right. First of all, people are worried about the mRNA and there may be pigs and that sort of thing. Well, we're not even that kind of a teetotaling kind of, they're not putting pig DNA into you and there's no way that that's going to change. That's not going to happen. You're not going to become a 5G antenna. And I don't know, I've got a 5G phone. There's a part of me that thinks, well, that might be good. My service would be better everywhere. Yeah. You're not going to become a robot. You're not going to become an automatron. According to the science. Now, there's a lot of pseudoscience out there. So I think what everyone has to do is check their sources. But I say this to religious people anyway, right? Religious people can get on very strange theology by not finding good sources and not really doing study themselves and just listening to whatever wacky person decides to say something. And so my hope is that Christians, Seventh-day Adventists in particular, who do have this wonderful background in health, will begin to get really good information coming from really strong and thoughtful academic sources. Because if you don't trust something, don't trust somebody to not trust it. Go and do your own research and find out if you should not trust it or you should trust it. That's a little bit of a confusing sentence, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Well, I mean, thinking about that, we are dealing with a paradigm shift within the way we're thinking, our theology. It's not the Renaissance, it's nothing like that. But I mean, how is this going to affect our theology? I mean, in terms of our church or even Christianity as a whole, religion, even people, the way that we're going to work and approach 2021.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what 2020 showed us, and I think the last few years have shown us, is there is an increasing politicalization of people's religious beliefs. And I think that's a shame, because I think that one of the stalwart things about Seventh-day Adventism is not that we don't believe in politics or we're not involved in politics, but we are very careful with that conversation. And I would hope that we would come back to that place, still being involved in your personal beliefs and that sort of thing, but not being brought into a political agenda of somebody else who doesn't really have God's best interests in mind. Because first and foremost, the label that we have is believers of Jesus Christ. Like, we believe in Jesus Christ. We're not left, we're not right. We don't support this president or this president above anything more than Jesus. And when we take on all those other identities, we actually diminish the work that God can do through us, I believe, because we're, it's like if you sell Amway, and I don't want to hammer on anyone who sells Amway, but I have a hard time with pastors who sell Amway, because every congregant becomes a financial resource, as opposed to somebody you're just in community with to help grow the kingdom of God. So I think those two things are hard to put together. Some people may be able to do it. I've never been able to figure out how that works. I think the same thing is true with political agendas. The same thing is true with worldview. I think what we have to do as Christians is drive ourselves back to Scripture, find the deep values that Jesus lived and expressed for the kingdom of God, and begin to live those again. And quite honestly, that doesn't have anything to do with church, even though hopefully church is a great expression of that. What that has to do is with your own personal conviction of who Jesus is and how he wants you to live the life of the kingdom of God in the world today. And I don't see, in my opinion, just an opinion, I think we've been taken up by the rhetoric of the day, and we've become a very mean and judgmental group of people. And we need to step away from that and find the grace of God again, because God gave us grace, and he expects us to give grace and understanding to other people as well. So no matter what year it is, no matter what crisis we're going through, I think that's what we need to be doing as Christians. And more particularly in 2021, as we're kind of, it feels like we're the children of Israel on an exodus out of Egypt, right? Hoping that things will get better, but we're kind of in Sinai right now, and things aren't great yet. Like, we're not in the promised land yet. So what did they do? In Exodus, they followed a pillar of smoke and pillar of fire. Still made a ton of mistakes, we know, but at least they saw the presence of God and they were following it. They leaned on God for his sustenance through manna. And then finally, when they just couldn't figure out how to act towards one another, God was gracious enough to give them the 10 commandments and say, this is how you deal with me, and this is how you deal with one another. This is what it means to love one another. This is what it means to deal with it. Now, they did some weird things with that, we know, but I think that what God was trying to do is say, I need you guys to grow up in the midst of this crisis, and I'm not willing to bring you to a promised land if you're going to carry all that baggage that you're bringing from Egypt. So I think what we need to do as Christians is we need to take 2021 to take a deep breath, do some real heart work and kingdom work in our own selves, and begin to move back towards how we want church to look, how we want our relationships to look, how we want to interact with people as we come back together. I don't know, that was a long answer to a short question.
No, it's good, because in thinking about that, I wonder if the pandemic is going to restructure or even allow us to reevaluate our theology, or are we called to change the climate in a sense? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think two things. I think there's two parts to that question. At least I'll answer it in two parts. One is, as Seventh-day Adventists, one of our deepest principles is the idea of present truth. So what is God showing us now, and how does that change, right? We have a statement of beliefs that is not a creed, and it's actually just a statement of what we think is happening at the time. We change that often. I shouldn't say often, but we do change those fundamental belief statements. So yeah, we should be changing, and we should see how pandemic and how all the strife in the world is changing our view of eschatology, is changing our view of community, is changing our, soteriology, our salvation understanding. The thing it won't change is who Jesus is. And that's the constant within all of it, which is good. So that's one thing. The second thing is, are we called to be a light to the world, or what are we called to bring to the world? I think what we're called to bring to the world, rather than just right theology, is a right kind of love. So orthodoxy would be right theology, and orthodoxy is important, but orthopathy is incredibly important as well, which is a right heart. We need to help right people's hearts. Doesn't mean we don't disagree, right? We can disagree and still love one another. And we seem to have forgotten that. And I think the church in particular, people who claim to believe in Jesus, need to be at the forefront of love, not at the forefront of division. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and this could be, I mean, the pandemic could go either way. It could divide us or it could unite us. And I think as Christians, we need to, I mean, we look at Ephesians, the separating wall, and how, Paul talks about, now that wall is down, is broken down. And now we have this pathway, not only to Christ, but it should be something that we take advantage of, especially in this time, to get closer and connect with one another. Although it is difficult. I mean, even, I wanted to kind of shift into thinking about how Pacific Islanders, because that's my people, and this is who we're the audience that I really want to connect with too on this, and how this is going to look for them, because, the death toll is rising within our community. For this, people are getting sick. We have, and it's just the way that we live. It's our culture. We like to gather with one another. I mean, we know that there is a risk in gathering together, but it's part of who we are. And so, we're trying to, I mean, if it hits home like it has for me, I've already been infected, my wife. And so now we're really careful about what we do, because it hit us and we really got sick. Mm-hmm. And then we don't want it to affect my father-in-law, my parents. My dad had it, and thankfully he's out of it. But then there are others who lost their loved ones. And so this is really going to affect the way that our Pacific Islander churches, primarily, who I'm talking about, our Samoan churches, are going to be affected by this in the future.
Yeah, I think, certain people groups value family in such a different, maybe not such a different way, but such a priority, right? And that becomes very difficult. I know that, at Christmas, my mom is 78, and she's hanging out with a guy who's 80, and they of course wanted to come over for Christmas, and we're like, well, not Christmas morning. We'll go into the backyard. We'll do an afternoon meal where we're all socially distanced. And I think they struggle because they're a little bit older with, is this really real? But it's really real. And the question is, well, there's two things, right? The first off is the question is, how do we love people? And I think we love people by keeping them safe. I think that's important. The second thing that we recognize is, as we do these things that are recommended to us, wear a mask, social distance, get the vaccine, we also get to get through this more quickly so that we can be back together and gather. So I'm willing to take, and I hope most people would be, willing to take a little bit of a sacrifice now for a greater joy at the end. That's what Jesus did for us, right? Well said, so we should be able to sacrifice in that way. And it's not convenient, it's not comfortable, and it stinks. And I think when it's, indelibly built into your culture that, no, we gather, that's what happens, it's going to be harder. So I feel for the Samoan community and some of the other communities that are really having to rearrange that structure, because I know that that's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for everybody. If only we could figure out how to sing through Zoom, it would be much better. But when you try and sing together with people on Zoom, it never works, right?
Well, I mean, last year, kind of in the middle of the year, they were saying, okay, it's safe if you're with your family, immediate family, if you kind of have these little gatherings within your homes with your in-laws or whatever, because you guys are the same blood. Now they're saying, no, don't do that. And that's really affecting a lot of our ethnic groups that really value, these gatherings, these small gatherings with their family. And especially us, we like to entertain our family. Here, we like to cook, we like to eat. This is what we do. And it's not happening. And you're right, because we need to learn how to sacrifice, certain things. And that is part of our culture right now that we have to really look at and say, okay, we value it, but do we value that above the life of our loved ones and those around us? And so love is the key. I think you're saying that is not only loving those, trying to protect those who, we don't want to get sick because they're, and especially with the underlying health issues that our people deal with, diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, all of these things that are going on. It's a really risky business for us to really rush into this right now.
Right. This may not be a good example, but when I was working with youth ministry a lot and working with teenagers. Every once in a while, you have a teenager who's really despondent and will come to you and say, I'm thinking of committing suicide or whatever. And I would always immediately say, okay, we're going to get professionals involved here. If this is what you're thinking, and they would always say, no, you can't tell anybody, because of course there's that fear. And if you tell somebody, I'm going to be very angry. My answer to that was always, be as angry as you want, because if you're angry at me, it means you're still alive. And so I would rather have a community that feels fractured for a while, but is still with me, knowing that we can get together eventually, than to lose people because we were so adamant that nothing can change. The truth is, and this is true forever, but the truth is that 2020 and 2021 is a year of incredible change, and we have to reorganize and rearrange our ideas. And again, I go back to the children of Israel. They were actually pretty comfortable in Egypt until that last Pharaoh came and started to really, kind of destroy their situation. As they were in Sinai, they had, and it took them 40 years plus, they had to rearrange the priorities in their life. That is a hard thing for us to do. We've been asked to do it much too quickly, but we still have to do that hard work so that when we come back together, it's not a convening of sadness because of those that we're missing because we weren't careful. It's a convening of joy because we're finally back together and everyone's safe.
No, I agree, Tim. I think this is a perfect way that we can end our interview. I don't want to keep it too long as well, but yeah, I think that, the sacrifices we make now will be, hopefully we'll be able to celebrate in the future as we gather. Now, before we end, I just, want to ask you any encouraging thoughts I think this whole interview was encouraging, but any encouraging thoughts, maybe some ideas or ways that, of connecting, especially today, and how can we still be relevant in this world that we're living in?
So I'll answer the relevant question first, because I think there's always one answer to that. And that is that we become better and better at loving, because the world needs more love. And I don't think, love is like a diamond. Very rarely do you see someone who says, I don't want to carry this diamond around. It's just too big, right? Nobody says that. You're happy to get the biggest diamond that you can, if you will. And so I think that we have to just continually get better and more intentional about the way that we love, number one. If I could give a word of encouragement, it's this, that we understand that the life of a disciple is a long obedience in one direction towards God. And in the midst of that, long obedience, there are some really difficult times, and we're living in those difficult times. We've known that they're coming. Do they say it's the sign of the end? Listen, there's certainly signs around us that say maybe time is coming, but we are going to live. That, to me, that's superfluous. When Jesus comes, I don't know when he's going to come, but I know this, that no matter what, every day that I live my life in obedience to him is a day that I am closer to seeing Jesus. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And through this time, we've got to continue to do that. And lastly, to connect with people, I would say this: stop just texting and make actual telephone calls or actual FaceTime calls or whatever the platform you're using. So you can kind of look people in the eyes and see them. I know it's a poor substitute, but I found myself getting in, there's a couple people in the church that I have literally texted for the last year, but haven't seen their face. And a couple times last week, I was texting somebody, and there are these long text threads that you have. And I finally was like, I'm just going to call you. And they were like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And we had a great, 40-minute conversation that would have been a week and a half of texting. And so create that connection, even though it's not physical, you're still there. And it's a little more real than just the digital means of communication. So that's what I would encourage. And I think it's not perfect, but if it's 60%, it's better than 0%.
No, that's true. And, I appreciate you also using the story of the Israelites in the wilderness, because we are that people right now in the wilderness. I think, there's a great parallel to that story right now. But, Dr. Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us and answering our questions. I think we could conversate and talk about this a lot more, but, in the interest of time and, for you and myself, man, we'll just end it here and say that we've been blessed, and I've been blessed by this interview. Thank you for your thoughts and for your time. And hopefully we can get through this And we're going to get through this together. And
That's right.
blessings to you and to your church as well and your family.
Thank you. And Pastor, thank you so much for the work that you continually do. We're all in the trenches following Christ together. So blessings on you and yours.
You too. Thank you, Dr. Gillespie.